Hi class, today we're going to be talking about the origins of humans, where we came from, and comparing that with the biblical account of God's creation and Adam and Eve. And then we're going to be talking about the earliest form of civilization, pre-civilization. And we'll be talking about the difference between history and prehistory and the Stone Age. So as we read in class, when you go and crack open your Bible, you're going to read in Genesis, the book of Genesis, God's form of creation, and each day something different happening. So on day 1, he separates the light from the darkness. Day 2, earth and sky. 3, land and sea. 4, stars and planets. 5, birds, sea creatures. 6, animals and humans. And 7, a little bit tired after creating the entire world, so he takes a bit of a rest. The question here is, how is this passage from the Bible meant to be interpreted? And how does evolution play into that? And that's part of the reason why you had the assignment to talk to your parents is it's important to know kind of what your family thinks about that. And having those discussions are very important. So I'm going to throw out some of the different theories. They're not the only theories, but they're just some of the major ones, and get you thinking, because you may or may not have thought about where did we come from initially, because there obviously was some beginning. People just disagree about where we came from. So the 4 different theories that we had here. The first one was young earth creationism, and that's essentially the belief that if you go and take the Bible and read it as literally as you can, you would see that first week, if you read it as 24 hours each day, and then you go and add that up to all the other periods of time mentioned in the Old Testament, depending upon how you add it up, the earth is about 6,000 to 10,000 years old. That's the first option that we talked about. A second option is that, yes, God is still the form of creation, but it's not meant to be read literally in a 24-hour period. And this would be called day-age creationism, meaning like one day, the first day, for instance, could have lasted millions of years or thousands of years, something like that. So the days are more metaphorical. The third option, taken by some Christians, is we go and we have this evidence for evolution, and some Christians go and say, evolution did occur, and it was merely God's plan to use evolution to go and have its purposes. So that this would be called theistic evolution or Christian Darwinist. And then the fourth viewpoint that we talked about was just a pure evolutionary viewpoint. This is just the scientific one. It's the same as the theistic evolution, except for it's just people not saying that God was the one who was behind this. So that's what you'll learn about in a science textbook. Which one of these is right, how this stuff works? This is why I wanted to have you have a conversation with your family. People get really involved with this and get very fired up and passionate. And it's just interesting to have this discussion with a loved one and just kind of get your mind thinking about it, because it's difficult for us to talk about it at sometimes in this country. And it's hard because a lot of emotions go along with it as well. This is actually interesting. This is a chart around the world looking at basically how do people think, what do people think of the theory of evolution? And as you go further over on the right-hand side, people are basically becoming more antagonistic towards evolution. And you on the left, people are becoming less. So, for example, Iceland is over 80%. But if you actually go to the good old US of A, we're actually relatively low, less than 40 out of 100, or about 39 there, would go and understand the theory of evolution and say that is a true theory. And Turkey beats us by a fairly significant amount, actually. Now, we talked about the story that comes after the creation story is the story of Adam and Eve. And you're probably pretty familiar with it, so I'll breeze through it relatively quickly. God creates the first man, Adam, out of dust and allows him to go and basically have his free reign around the Garden of Eden, hang out with the animals, be in control, all that fun stuff. Then Adam goes and he gets a little bit bored, and God decides to make him a companion, and that's Eve, who's made out of Adam's rib. And they're having a good time, and they have one rule. And the one rule is that they can't go and eat the fruit from the tree. Traditionally, the story, we say an apple. And they can't eat from the tree. And the serpent, or Satan, goes and tempts Adam and Eve, and they go and they take the fruit, eat the fruit. And obviously God's not too happy, because that's the one rule he gave them. They could do anything else but that. And they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and life is going to be a lot harder for them, obviously, because you're not living in God's garden anymore. Now, the theological concept that we talked about in class was this concept of original sin. And this is the idea that Adam and Eve going and choosing the forbidden fruit was the original sin. And what I mean by sin is basically not obeying God's laws or missing the mark in some form. So it was the original sin, the first sin. And the concept is basically that because we are all descendants of Adam and Eve, them being the first people ever, we kind of inherit this idea, what we would call sin nature. The idea that if we're going to be chosen to, to our own devices, we are going to go against God. So it's almost inherited like a genetic disease or something like that, and everybody has this form of sin, which we inherit from Adam and Eve. So it's a theological or kind of a churchly concept. Just some dating systems so we're aware. A lot of you are familiar with the traditional system, the old school system, BC and AD, which goes and divides the different periods of time. But more recently, historians have gone and added these two new parts. The equivalent of BC now, and this is in your textbook, is BCE, before the Common Era. And the equivalent of AD is CE, or Common Era. And the question for this, or the reason for this, some of you may be asking is, obviously not everybody's a Christian, and some people get offended by this old school system, so they change the letters here to, I guess, not be offensive, which is kind of somewhat silly at the same time because the dating system is still based off of the birth of Christ. They just don't call it that. But anyways, I just wanted you to be familiar, so when you're looking at the textbook, and what the heck is CE? CE is the same as AD, and I'll use them interchangeably. Now, there's two periods in prehistory, and the difference between history and prehistory is as follows. History has writing. When we go and look at most of the history of the world, we have a lot of prehistory, and we don't have writing. We have drawings, we have paintings, stuff like that. But we don't have writing. If we don't have writing, we can't read anything, so we have to make inferences from what we can tell. So there's two parts to prehistory. There is the Paleolithic times and the Neolithic times. Paleo means old, Neo means new, and lithic means rock. So this is the Old Stone Age, and this is the New Stone Age, or New Rock Age. And these are the numbers from the textbook, running from about 2 million to 8,000 BCE or BC, and about 8,000 to 4,000. Now, what was life like in the Old Stone Age for the Paleolithic guy? What did his life look like? He lived as a subsistence person, basically meaning he or she was living just to survive the day, trying to get food to survive the day. They lived together in small bands or groups that went around and looked for food, and they were a communal society, meaning they went and shared resources together, and they divided labor. This is where you think about hunter-gatherers. They were nomadic, meaning they went and moved from place to place. So buffalo moves, they go in the fall of the buffalo. They're hunter-gatherers, men tended to hunt, women would gather, and there's also evidence that they buried their dead. Then we went and transitioned to the Neolithic Age. It's not like one day like a volcano exploded and like everybody, oh, we're in the Neolithic Age. No, it's a period of time in which these two things occurred, these three things actually. The first one is that animals began to be domesticated, meaning they kept in one place, and traditional farm animals, they don't have to go follow around buffalo or something like that anymore. The second thing that they did is they began to produce their own food, agriculture, which led to the third thing, which is permanent settlement. And once you have permanent settlement, then you can have the development of civilization, if you make the connection there. Here's good old Stonehenge, which is in England, and I'm going to talk about it here for a minute because people are always like, is this during the Stone Age? And yes, it was. It was during one of the two Stone Ages that we've talked about here in class. It was constructed approximately about 3000 BC. Some people go and get really into it and say aliens did it and it's all that nonsense, but historians have been able to prove that using construction techniques during that time, they could have built it. What was it used for? Well, there's not writing, right? So we have to go and make inferences. Some guesses is that it was a place of healing. A lot of the bones that they found around, buried around Stonehenge are kind of deformed. So they think maybe people that were deformed and had all these health issues would go there to get healed. Some form of cemetery, because there's so many people buried there. So maybe it had some religious significance or some societal significance as well. And we were pretty sure about some astrological significance in terms of how it's lined up and relating to the winter and the summer solstice. So there you go. We talked a bit about the origins of man, and then we also talked about the Stone Age and a little bit about Stonehenge as well.